I am just ecstatic about the involvement in our service today by our children and young people. Isn't that awesome? Love seeing them at the piano, love seeing them singing with us and for us, and they're going to sing a little bit more at the end one more time, so that's why I'm fixing this microphone instead of just letting it go. But anyway, we are grateful for their involvement in worship, and we are grateful for your willingness to empower them to lead us in this way. What a blessing. Thank you, guys. The valleys and the mountains. Keep our eyes on him. Well, this past week, Kathy and I have been privileged to share the time every morning, Monday through Friday, with the students of Lubbock Junior Academy in their fall week of prayer. It's been an amazing blessing to us, and to hear these kids sing. By the way, I don't know a group of school students that sing better than they do, and more engaging and more involvement than we see with them. It was just a wonderful week. The theme for the messages this week has been trusting God. Trusting God. We were learning that trust is really a choice that we make to believe and have confidence in someone or something. So we learned also that trust isn't necessarily something you can touch or see, but trust is, Jamie, trust is, where is trust? In your heart. The last 3 days this week, every single time I did that, here's this voice. What a sweet voice, talking about trusting Jesus in her heart. Each day we looked at a specific way that we can know that God can be trusted by seeing how different Bible characters found that God was faithful in their lives. On Monday, the focus was we can trust God to provide for our needs. And we used the story of how God provided for the needs of Elijah when God told him to go by the brook Cherith and to just be there. And twice a day, ravens would bring him food, and he would have water there in the brook at the time after he had announced to Ahab there was going to be a famine for several years. At the front end of that, it wasn't told how many, but at the back end, we find out that it was 3 years that they had famine in the land. Drought, no rain. When the brook dried up, God told him to go to a little village called Zarephath, and he would find a widow there that would help him with food. Amazing story. She used the very last little bit of her flour and oil. She told him, I'm just gathering sticks to bake one more loaf of bread, and then my son and I will die. And he said, if you'll give me that loaf, you'll have bread to go. You'll have more flour, more oil. And it was that story where it was the miraculous just enough for today portions of flour and oil. For the next however long it was, I'm not sure at what point he transitioned from the brook Cherith to Zarephath, but God can be trusted to provide for our needs. Whether it's in response to a heart that says, I'm going to trust you and go ahead and put my offering envelope in, and he did something immediately. God is faithful like that. On Tuesday, we talked about we can trust God to be with us. With us. We used the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and we learned that even though they ended up in the fiery furnace because they chose not to worship the image that the king had set up, that they didn't go there alone. They were ready to go. They said, yes, if he doesn't deliver us, he's still our God. They go into the fiery furnace, and you know the story. God shows up there with them. God can be trusted to be with us. On Wednesday, we talked about we can trust God to answer our prayers. We talked a little bit about Joseph's story. You know what happened to him? His brothers kind of got hacked off, that he thought he was all that, and maybe he really didn't, but they thought he did. Be that as it may, they sell him to some traders. They take him to a foreign land, Egypt, a long ways away from home. And while he would pray that he would be able to go home, he wanted to be with his dad and his family. He was sad to be away from home. He would pray that God would answer that prayer. But how did he do it? In the end, Joseph becomes a ruler of a very amazing part of what's happening in another famine. And when his brothers came looking for food, yes, it was Joseph that had what they needed. Amazing. Years later, when the brothers, even though they had done something horrible to Joseph, in the end he told them, while you did something horrible, God meant it for good. The lesson that we can always trust God to answer our prayers for our good and for his glory. Romans 8:28, we know that God is working for our good, and that's the way God is. We can trust him to be that kind of God. Thursday, we can trust God to protect and guide us. The story of Daniel, familiar illustration, how God used him once again in a foreign land as a witness of his incredible belief that God was going to be faithful no matter what. And you also understand that God blessed Daniel to rise to a powerful position, even though he was a prisoner of war, so to speak. God also honored him when he was pressured to worship the king. You heard this crazy story. Even though they had their own gods and their idols, they flattered the king, the other leaders, into thinking that it would be appropriate. It'd be a cool thing for everybody to just worship the king for 30 days. They knew exactly what they were doing. They were focusing on Daniel, and they tagged him with their plot. But Daniel didn't change a thing. He kept on praying to his God, worshiping the God of heaven. Because of his choice to place his faith in God and him only, he spent a night with some hungry lions. God put his angels in charge of the challenge, and they shut the lion's mouth. No doubt one of the most amazing, miraculous stories that we can read. And then yesterday morning, we closed with saying that we can trust God to save us forever. We ask him to deliver us, to protect us, to help us, to provide for us. He does all those things. But aren't we most interested in what he has promised is still to come? His reward to us for faithfulness. We talked about God's greatest desire, his end game with his children, to save us for forever. And that is exactly what we hope will always be our focus. So yes, we had an amazing week. Kathy and I were blessed to spend these special days with these amazing students and their awesome teachers. And we thank Ms. Mary Bell and Mr. Bim for letting us do that. It has been a blessing for us. And so while our focus this week was on trust, we think of the word also that's a synonym with that called faith. I would like for us to take a new look at what it means to truly trust God, to have faith, to walk by faith, to live by faith, to live in faith, to be faithful. Turn with me this morning, if you will, to the most Old Testament book in the New Testament, Hebrews. There are more quotes from the Old Testament in that book than any other New Testament book there is. In chapter 11 of Hebrews, we find the most profound presentation of people who God considers heroes of faith. I say this because they're mentioned specifically by the writer of Hebrews, who was inspired by the Holy Spirit. So if God is going to impress the writer of Hebrews to say that these people were faithful and are recognized as heroes of faith, wouldn't we think that they are? Well, of course. God said it through his impression, the inspiration for writing the book. Now, we're not sure who wrote the book, but scholars really believe that it had to be Paul. There's one verse next to the last verse in the last chapter that talks about Timothy soon being released and coming to you, and it ties into how it was related to the book of Acts and one of the missionary journeys and Paul's imprisonment. But be that as it may, Paul, or whoever, wrote this book, It starts right out with the definition of what it means to know and understand faith. You realize that in this book, in this chapter alone, the two-word phrase, by faith, appears 19 times. It's really a faith chapter. And 16 different heroes of faith are identified specifically. And then there's a whole bunch more we'll talk about in just a moment. But let's just start with all of us together at verse 1 of Hebrews 11. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. There's different ways of saying that. When you are sure that you know what you're going to get or what you need or what you believe in, but yet you don't see it visibly, physically, you see it through the eyes of faith. So faith is what the ancients were commended for. The word is used here as elders a number of times, but it's not intended to be the elders in terms of age or pecking order in a family system. It's talking about the ancients, the people who have been around for a long time, whose stories are being told still because of their faith. Verse 3, by faith, there's the first one. We understand that the universe was formed at God's command. Well, there we are again. We talked about the creation story when we were going through Colossians. We have to understand that the beginning is where we have to begin. And that means that if we understand that God was the one who started it all, he can be trusted to be the one who has still got it going. So by faith, the universe was formed by God's words. Let there be, and there was. So that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. Oh, okay, he didn't just take something over here and recreate it, craft it in just sort of some kind of way. He spoke, and something came from whatever. Nothing or some other form, it was without form and void, means it didn't have a shape and it was empty. But what all was there, we'll have to ask him specifically when we get to heaven. But be that as it may, his word created everything. Verse 4, by faith Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. Oh, so where are we supposed to find out that the meat was a better sacrifice than the vegetables grown in Cain's garden? When we understand the context of the offering, the gift that those two gentlemen, those brothers made, we come to understand that it was their attitude that was the better gift, the better sacrifice. Abel came following exactly what God said, and Cain says, I'm going to just bring it here because I got to. He said it. I'm not really down with it, but I'm going to do it anyway. So that was by far the better offering when he gave with his attitude of gratitude. He was commended as a righteous man, and when God spoke well of his offerings, and by faith, he still speaks even though he's dead. We talk about Abel's offering today because we want to understand the importance of giving out of an attitude of gratitude. We understand that he continues to testify of what it means to listen to God's heart and then respond with ours. Verse 5, by faith Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. Another one, we talked about Elijah, where he became the newest resident of heaven years after Enoch had been taken to heaven without death as well. He couldn't be found because God had taken him away, for before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. Can that be said of us? Why? Verse 6, and without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. If we seek him, he will be found. And isn't that reward enough? We find God and understand that he cares for us and he loves us and we matter to him. Then the next one, verse 7. These are just some amazing people in the context of the story of our lives here on earth. I'm just going to step through them for a few minutes. Each one special enough in their life of faith, in their walk of faith, to have God reference them through inspiration. Number 7, by faith Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. He invited everybody to come. And how many did? 8. He and his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. But because they did, what an amazing thing happened in the context of human relationships and humankind on the earth. God had to put an end to some of the nonsense that was going on. He came in a massive way, a cosmic way. And my friends, it's going to happen again. When he comes the second time into our earth, it says, as it was in the days of Noah. Matthew 24 tells us. It's going to be that way when Jesus comes again. And by the way, you're looking a lot like those kind of days to me. By his faith, to save his family. I'm going to come back to that theme in just a minute. That one, by the way, is incredibly important. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he didn't know where he was going. Wow. It's not like a man to not know where he's going, is it? Just bear with me, brothers. Don't we all have somebody in our lives that says, just get directions. You don't know where you're going. Well, it's not as common as it used to be because we got GPS in our phone. We can fall back. We don't need to know how to get there. We just want to know about what time to think we might get there. We know where we're going. But Abraham didn't. He just simply said, yes, Lord, and began to move. By the way, Abraham left Ur of the Chaldees, which was over near the area where where Job actually lived. And the archaeologists have found Ur, and about the time that Abraham would have lived there on the Euphrates River, with 2-story, beautiful houses. And it says here that by faith, in verse 9, he made his home in the promised land. Like a stranger in a foreign country, he lived in tents. Those are 2 words, in tents, not intense, as in one word. It might have been intense too. And Sarah says, this is where you came? This is where you brought us? Knew you didn't know where you were going. But here we have them living in a foreign country in tents. He was willing to go there because God said, it's time to go. Read the story in Genesis. It's an amazing experience as these guys get up and move to where God would show them. For he was looking, Isaac and Jacob also were heirs with him in the same promise. Why? Because God repeated the promise to each of those fellows in their generations. The same promise that he gave to Abraham, that he would make of him a great nation, a multitude of descendants. Look up in the sky, Abraham. Count those stars if you can. You're going to have more people as descendants than there are stars. Verse 10. For Abraham was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder was God. Not much of an architect to put a tent up, not much building required, but Abraham was looking for a city. He was looking for what God had called him to look forward to. in the promise of his moving out by faith. Verse 11, by faith Abraham, even though he was past age and Sarah herself was barren, was enabled to become a father and she a mother because they considered him faithful who had made the promise. My friends, this is a hard one. A lot of people say, it's not possible. No way. It couldn't have happened. But I just want to remind you, if it's God that makes the promise, we just leave it up to him to figure out how to fulfill it. Because what God says, he will do. And we can trust him to do it. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, now man alive, 100 years old, nothing happening when it came to the whole concept of reproduction or subsequent generations. God said, I'm going to make you like a multitude coming from your seed. But nothing was happening. From him came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. God does things in a big way, doesn't he? Just amazing sometimes. We often think of just, oh, wow, if we could just get a little sign, we kind of know that maybe he's around somewhere. No, God specializes in blowing our minds sometimes. Just absolutely rocking our world because we kind of think in the small ways. But God does things in big ways. You know why? Because if we could be happy with the small ways, we might just start thinking it's something that we did. But if our vision isn't big enough, if our hope isn't grand enough, it's because we're depending upon ourselves to make it happen. If we truly believe that it needs something that's magnificent, we need to have a bigger dream, a bigger vision, a bigger hope, a hope that says eternity is what he's promised, and eternity is what I am holding on for. Wow. Interesting that the next few verses are really amazing in the context of the story of Abraham. By the way, Abraham's got more verses in this chapter than any of these other heroes. Abraham was that foundational character that actually started the whole idea of God's children, God's family that were going to come down through the years. And it says, all these people, verse 13, were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. They saw them through the eyes of faith. They were looking for a country. They were looking for buildings. They were looking for a home. And could have gone back, by the way. It would have taken them just as long as it had taken them to get there so far. But God had called them to something else, and God was going to be faithful. Verse 16, instead they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Yes, indeed, Abraham knew that God had more for him than what he could even imagine. We continue now. Abraham's story is going to take a really weird twist. Verse 17, by faith Abraham, when God tested him, what? Offered Isaac as a sacrifice? No way. He who had received the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son. By the way, it's interesting that the Greek word here is the same one used in John 3:16. Only begotten son. But that's how he described it, the writer of Hebrews. It's the only son. Well, no, he had another one, but that one didn't count because it wasn't the way God planned it. Even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. Abraham reasoned that God could raise the dead, and figuratively speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the death. Amazing. What a test of faith this was. Can you even imagine it, moms and dads? How in the world could this be possible? Well, we know that God spoke against sacrifices such as this throughout the course of his time with the children of Israel. Years later, some of the foreign gods that were served and other people were involved in that. But what a faith challenge for Abraham. God commanded him to sacrifice his son, but the promise had been clearly given that Isaac would carry on Abraham's line, continue to build it into a living nation. And how could this be possible if this is what happened? But now the command of God seemed to contradict the promise of God. We'd be okay if Abraham was confused, wouldn't we? If he was just shocked. Maybe if he was even a little upset. Sacrifice his only son? If Isaac died, wouldn't it be all over? This promise thing wouldn't have a way of happening now. God's promise that Abraham would be the father of multitudes would surely die with Isaac. Yet by faith, the Bible says, Abraham is willing to put everything on that altar. His hopes, his future, the object of his love and affection that he had waited most of his life to embrace. Remember, Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. Ed, we're not quite there. I'm so grateful. Yet by faith, Abraham obeyed this command. He didn't know why God would do it this way, but he trusted that God knew what he was doing. What he didn't know is he stood by that altar up on Mount Horeb, was how much Isaac would become a symbol, sort of a parable illustrating Jesus, God's only son. By the way, this whole sacrifice thing was as much a faith challenge for Isaac as it was for Abraham. Isaac, by this time, would have been somewhere between 30 and 35 years old. And like Jesus, Isaac went willingly to follow the sacrifice, willingly to the sacrifice. Abraham lifted the knife above his head to sacrifice the son of promise when God suddenly stopped him. And my friends, some 1,500 years later, God would once again stop the sacrifice at the temple, and the veil between the holy place and the most holy place would be torn from the top to the bottom, completely exposing the most holy place as God made himself available to all who would accept the gift of salvation. Amazing story. Scholars tell us that Solomon's temple was built on Mount Moriah, the very same mountain Abram and Isaac ascended that day so many years before. Can you even imagine the similarities, the parable-like relationship between the story of Isaac and the commanded sacrifice, the faith challenge and test for Abraham? Abraham, the father of the faithful, illustrated with Isaac the very depths of the gospel of Christ. And my friends, Paul tells us in his letter to the Galatians that because of Jesus, now we, like Isaac, are also children of that promise. It extends to us as well, just all the way back from Abraham, all the way through the Bible to our current times. All of that promise that God made to Abraham applies to us too because of what Jesus has done. My friends, that's heavy stuff. An amazing challenge to faith, but an amazing thing that happened because Abraham was willing to trust. The next few verses. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. You remember that the younger one got the blessing of that should have gone to the firstborn, so to speak. Double portion. In the same way, by faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. Remember, he crossed his hands. even though he was blind, and gave the double portion to the younger one. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. And he gave instructions to everybody, when I'm not alive, but I believe we're getting out of here, take my bones with you. Want to go home. Want to be part of the Promised Land Brigade. In these sections right here, I'm reminded about the importance of faith transfer. You know what that means? What I mean in that context is that as parents, we are called upon to be faithful, to live a life of faith, trusting God and modeling to our children that they too can trust God because they know we do. We have explained to them that He loves them and that He cares for them and that He can be trusted. Over here we turn back to verse 7. By faith Noah built an ark to save his family. What a powerful reason. What a faith transfer there. And then Abraham to Isaac, and Isaac to Jacob, and Jacob to Joseph. The importance of being able to share our faith with our children so they come to understand that God is faithful, that He can be trusted. I just want to tell you that I saw that firsthand in the life of people that were important to me. Kathy's dad, my father-in-law, Wayne Thurber. What a lover of people. What a lover of young people. What a servant of the Lord. What a faithful man who showed us what it meant to live by faith, to trust God, and thereby he built faith in our hearts as well. I hope we don't miss this point. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child. By faith, Moses, when he'd grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt because he was looking ahead to his reward. By keeping our eyes focused on the faithfulness of God, we can understand the importance of the reward that He has offered. An eternity of being saved forever as opposed to just getting out of this situation today. Well, we move right on down the line quickly here as we try to draw a conclusion this morning. By faith, the people of Israel passed through the Red Sea as on dry land. But when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. Wonder why? They didn't have faith in God to help them get across. God had made this a faith opportunity and a faithfulness of His own provision for His people. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the people had marched around them for 7 days. All the people had to exercise that faith in those last two situations. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed. Then verse 32, what more shall I say? I don't have time to even tell you about Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets. And then for several different verses here, it's just talking about all those folks who lived in a triumphal situation or who were heroes of suffering. And then even us, all of this transfers forward to relate to us as well. My friends, in this book, in this chapter, the writer's purpose was not so much to prepare a catalog of all of God's faithful ones down through the centuries, but only to illustrate his point that faith and faithfulness are essential to patient waiting for the reward, which is the coming of the Lord and the ultimate fulfillment of His promises. The thrilling recital of the earlier list may have taken more space than the writer at first intended, and he proceeds to refer to others in less specific terms, but even more people than even in the first part where the 16 were mentioned. The thrilling part of this is he includes all kinds of people of faith in that context. In this 11th chapter, he implies that by faith, The worthies of old, the ancients, lived as it were in the very presence of God. They were calling upon him. They were seeing his response. They were living by faith day in and day out. Inasmuch as they enjoyed that privilege and were able to remain faithful, then so may we. Words from the SDA Bible Commentary. Verse 39. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised. God had planned something better to include us as well, so that when all of us see Jesus when he comes, we will be able to experience together being made perfect through the grace of Jesus Christ. Oh, they could have seen something. They could have all gone, just like Elijah, just like Enoch. But no, he let them fall asleep. And we will experience the joy and the celebration of the reward together. So therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off all the stuff that distracts us. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus. Keep moving towards him. Keep being faithful and trusting that he's going to be faithful. When we turn our eyes upon Jesus and look full in his wonderful face, all the things of earth grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. My friends, my hope today, as we just simply put a little bit of a finishing touch on a week of studying the importance of trusting God and having faith in him, we can understand that even though those folks that went before didn't get to see the holy city, they didn't get to experience the reward that was promised, we too are looking forward. But we're so much closer to it than they were. And we're closer than when we first believed. Every day is drawing us closer to that wonderful day when Jesus will break through the clouds. I'm reminded as I close today about, once again, my father-in-law. My dad died 50 years ago, and my father-in-law died 30 years ago. During those 20 years, to build on the faith of my own dad's experience with me, with a man of God like my father-in-law, I can't tell you how powerfully poignant and important that is in my own life and my faith journey as well. But I remember him telling the story when he was just a young guy, kind of at the end of a week of prayer or something like that in school, and he decided that God was calling him to be a pastor. He took his Bible, somewhere, 12, 13 years old, Cass, something like that. Went out to the woods all by himself. And he opened his Bible, set it on a tree stump where the loggers had cut down the tree and left a stump. Used it for a pulpit. And he preached a sermon on the second coming of Jesus and how exciting that would be and how wonderful it would be and how important it was to live a life accepting the invitation of salvation. And he ended with this verse, Hebrews 10:35. In the King James, cast not away therefore your confidence, which hath great recompense of reward. Oh, we use recompense all the time now. Isn't that a greater word? It has to do with compensation. It is this for that. The NIV says, don't throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. You need to persevere. Hold on a little longer. For in just a very little while, he who is coming will come and will not tarry. It's going to happen. He's going to come. It's his promise. And we can hold him to it. Because God does what he says he's going to do. Every time. So here we are, another 2,000 years since the writer of Hebrews penned this testimony. And we're still waiting. Waiting for the one who's promised to come and take us to live with him, with all these other heroes of faith as well. Many of us have been waiting for a long time. Perhaps we find ourselves wondering when, maybe even if, he will come. I understand your questions. It's been a while. Some believe that he's waiting for us, but I want to tell you, I believe that he knows when he's coming. And the Father especially, Jesus said the Father knows the day and hour. He's going to come in the fullness of time as he came the first time. I want to be part of that group. My friends, we consider the world we live in, the challenges that grow more complex and troublesome by the day. I ask you, what else can we do but hold on? He's promised that he will come, and I appeal to each of us to believe today like never before, and then to continue to believe tomorrow, and then the next day, and the one after that. And you get it. May I remind you that this world is not our home. Just like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we're looking for a country. We're looking for one that whose builder and maker is God. Reminded that the confidence, the assurance that we felt in times past, that Jesus was coming soon, must not be abandoned or discarded, no matter what difficulties we might now be facing. This confidence, our hope, our faith in his promises will be richly rewarded. Salvation does not depend on human effort, since it is totally the work of God. But as long as our participation in eternal life remains a promise, my appeal to you is to keep persevering in faith. Because God is faithful, we will receive what he has promised. For in just a little while, he who is coming will come and will not tarry. But until that day, I pray that we will all just keep trusting the Lord as we walk with him every day. May we just keep holding on while we continue to live by faith in the assurance of his promise. Just keep trusting the Lord.